everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss, where today I'm looking at 10 of the darkest timelines in Star Trek history. One of the things that Star Trek is most well known for is for showing the audience alternate versions of known events and characters by taking their stories to different timelines and dimensions. This trope seems to be coming back to the forefront of the franchise, with rampant rumors that the future of the series Star Trek Picard will have a storyline that includes one or both of these elements, and that the series Picard will perhaps affect the other series currently being produced. While each story tends to take our crews in stranger directions, the one constant seems to be that most of these different timelines don't seem to turn out so good for the human race. From invasions by cybernetic races, to time paradoxes, to ecological disasters, traveling between different timelines just seems like a bad idea, but the writers of Star Trek can't seem to stop creating these universe-bending stories. So here I thought I would take a look at some of the bleaker timelines from the history of the franchise, but I would love to hear what your favorite story is, so be sure to let me know in the comments. If this is your first time here, my name is Eric and I cover sci-fi news on this channel while also doing breakdown videos like this, so you can help stop my timeline from being a dark one by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel if you have not yet. We can't get very far on a list of dark timelines without mentioning possibly the most infamous alternate timeline in Star Trek history. So let's start out by talking about the vast and often used mirror universe. If you are not aware, the mirror universe is a dimension in which everyone and everything from the main Star Trek universe is basically present, but reflected in a distorted fashion, so that each is an opposite representation of the original. The concept was first shown to the viewers in the original series' second season episode Mirror Mirror, from which this universe takes its namesake, and which featured a transporter malfunction that sends 4 members of the Enterprise crew to this alternate universe, while also sending their counterparts to the main one. Jerome Bixby, who also wrote the infamous Twilight Zone episode It's a Good Life, wrote the original episode and is credited with creating the concept, which does feel like a Twilight Zone version of a Star Trek episode. In this universe, Earth has created the Terran Empire that is built on conquest and has enslaved many other races, a far cry from the utopia that the Federation strives for. This would be the first of 12 storylines across 4 different series that would include this universe, and would even lead to one character from this universe, Philippa Georgiou, being a large part of the first 3 seasons of the series Discovery. It is not known if one event caused this massive universe to be different, or if it is just designed to be in this manner, as in the intro to the Mirror Universe Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly, we can see that in this universe, the Terran Empire has lasted longer than the Federation has been in existence in the main timeline. What probably makes this concept so popular is that it's not only scary, but pretty fun, since we get to see alternate versions of known characters that are very different from their archetypes. Speaking of infamous alternate takes on Star Trek history, the version created by the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie is one of the most popular yet divisive among fans. As more so than any other timeline on this list, it establishes a second version of events that redefine the characters and stories we know and love. The incident that triggered this was an incursion from the main timeline that involved original cast member Leonard Nimoy as Spock, as well as a Romulan militant named Nero, who travels back to before the birth of James Kirk. Nero is hell-bent on destroying the planet Vulcan as revenge over the destruction of his home planet Romulus, an act that he blames Spock for, an event that isn't supposed to happen for many years. This movie event spawned 2 more films and a good amount of new interest in the franchise, and while there have been as many as 5 different attempts to get another chapter of this story out with another sequel, it seems that at least for now, there will not be any new stories in this timeline. Although, this timeline was referenced in an episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek Discovery, in one that involves characters from the Mirror Universe as well, in which a character there mentions that the timeline was destroyed, but the circumstances behind this are left vague. Besides the destruction of Vulcan in this new timeline, it is also shown that the Federation had become a much different entity after the arrival of Nero from the future. This turned the Federation into a much more militaristic organization instead of one focused on exploration and scientific discovery, and led to the creation of new weaponry, which ranged from larger ships to genetically enhanced soldiers. Star Trek produced one of its franchise-defining episodes at the tail end of just its first season on the air in 1967, with the episode The City on the Edge of Forever. This episode also introduced the character the Guardian of Forever, which is an entity that has access to multiple timelines and dimensions and would be referenced again in future stories. In this episode, Dr. McCoy is sent back in time through a strange set of circumstances, and Captain Kirk and Commander Spock must follow him through the Guardian of Forever, not only to find him, but to save their future. When Dr. McCoy traveled through time, he somehow is responsible for changing the events of their history, and if they cannot fix the past, America will lose World War II, and among other horrible things, the Federation will not exist. Although we do not actually see this future, it is still a chilling revelation that fascism is able to take over the world due to the character Edith Keeler, played by Joan Collins, who is in fact a pragmatic pacifist and understands that science is the way forward. But because these ideals shift the focus of America from the war, it results in catastrophe and the end of their future. is a stunning and thought-provoking storyline that invokes the lyrics of the song Turn, Turn, Turn by the band The Byrds. There is a time for war, and a time for peace, and a time to live, and a time to die, which was released 2 years before the release of this episode, coincidentally. This theme is witnessed again with a shocking ending in which Captain Kirk must allow Miss Keeler, a woman he has fallen in love with, to die in front of him so that the future can be restored. Widely regarded as one of the best episodes of The Next Generation, yesterday's Enterprise is another what-if type storyline that shows us how important one seemingly minuscule event can change the course of history. In this story, the USS Enterprise D comes into contact with its prior C version, which was lost many years earlier. As soon as this meeting occurs, the ship and crew are immediately changed to reflect this new timeline, and we see a Federation at war with the Klingon Empire and losing badly. Besides the differences in set and costume design, characters like Deanna Troi, the ship's counselor, were not shown due to there being no need for her position on a wartime vessel. This also allowed for one character to return who had been killed off in the first season, Security Chief Tasha Yar, which helped the popularity and the impact of the episode. This also leads to another stunning twist in that Tasha must return with the Enterprise C to their timeline so they can successfully complete their mission, which is one that the ship will not survive. I always thought that since the Next Generation crew never had an episode in the mirror universe, that this one was the closest the fans would see, as the events that have not transpired have drastically changed our characters' perspectives and behaviors. Not only that, but the events of this episode actually lead to the creation of a new character, Sela, a character that Denise Crosby would reprise on a further episode and features heavily in the Star Trek Online game. And finally, this episode also gives us a great last stand moment from this universe's version of Captain Picard as we see him fight the Klingons to the end and refusing to surrender. If the cast of Voyager got a movie, there's no doubt that the story of it would have been the Year of Hell. No, this time I'm not talking about the year 2020 or the year that ska bands were popular. I am referring to the two-part episode in Voyager's third season, in which the crew basically battle time itself because of the actions of a troubled scientist named Anorax, who has the ability to manipulate timelines by destroying the existence of civilizations. He is doing this under the guise of changing history to help his race, but in actuality he's trying to fix an error that caused the death of millions of his people, including his family. Not only does the future get bleaker after each incursion, but the idea that he is able to not only destroy entire civilizations, but completely erase them from ever existing is chilling to say the least. Because of this, the crew of the Voyager are constantly battling the now militant Kremen race as they try to find a way back to Earth, but eventually draw the attention of Anorax and his vessel after the crew are able to shield themselves from the attacks. This is another butterfly effect type episode, but is unique in that the events that transpire are referenced in an episode that airs in the prior season to the one in which Year of Hell aired, the Kess-centric episode before and after. This has long been one of my favorite episodes of Voyager and perhaps all of Star Trek because of the subverted way it handles the time travel paradox and shows the audience the many dangers that could be influenced by just the smallest changes. Although not as popular as most of the other series in the Star Trek catalog, the Captain Archer-led series Enterprise had some fantastic stories, and many happened in the third season of the show, which includes the episode Twilight. If you are not familiar with the season, it involves an overarching storyline that includes a complicated race of beings known as the Xindi and an attack on Earth that results in thousands of lost lives. The main purpose of the season is to find the Xindi and stop them from coming back to finish the job and destroy Earth. Most of the third season is pretty dark, as it involves acts of terrorism and some win-at-all-cost choices by our favorite characters, and truly rivals the Dominion War storyline on Deep Space Nine as the most compelling yet disturbingly realistic look at wartime in franchise history. But the episode Twilight shows the audience what would happen if the Xindi do win the war and Earth is completely destroyed, which leads to the few survivors who were not on the planet at the time of the attack to lead lives as refugees. This entire timeline is caused by an event in the present that injures Captain Archer and forces him to resign his commission, which prevents him from stopping the Xindi attack from taking place, making him the unfortunate de facto cause for this timeline. The condition is eventually cured by Dr. Phlox in this future, and has the side effect of also curing Captain Archer in the past. This allows Captain Archer to complete the mission, yet he and everyone else involved have no recollection of the other future in which Earth was destroyed. This episode aired rather early on in the Xindi storyline arc, and I always thought it was smart to show the result of the Enterprise failing their mission to stop the Xindi, as it raises the stakes of the entire season. The third season of Deep Space Nine gave us the episode Past Tense, which stands as one of the most meaningful and poignant stories of any series, and is the one that leaves the audience wondering just how responsible Benjamin Sisko is for the Star Trek main timeline. There were not many hints what caused humanity to enter the post-atomic horror period, as well as a Third World War that was mentioned in The Next Generation, besides that it occurred before humanity's first contact with the Vulcans. But this episode throws 3 members of the Defiant crew back to an important event that would be known as the Bell Riots. This event does still lead to the global conflict, but as the crew learns, without it, humanity would never have evolved to where they are currently. This episode is an amazing commentary on prejudice and social injustice, while also showing the role that media plays in these moments, and shows us just how far down humanity had gotten before the end. In this episode, we see that people who are unable to find work are treated as second-class citizens and housed in large sanctuary districts, which chillingly enough was an actual local government proposal that was being suggested during the filming of the episode. But what makes this episode and timeline so enthralling is that as the two-part episode progresses, Benjamin Sisko takes up the moniker of Gabriel Bell after the latter's death and is able to survive the Bell riots as history may have intended, as a time paradox is a loop that just continues over and over again. So this could mean that Benjamin Sisko has always replaced Gabriel Bell, and therefore his actions are responsible for the change that this event caused, which leads to the creation of the Federation hundreds of years later. This is just one of the many times that Deep Space Nine fans are faced with the question of the true importance of Benjamin Sisko, and if he is the dreamer or the dream. Much like the Enterprise episode Twilight that I just mentioned, the Voyager episode Timeless is another story that shows an alternate future in which the mission of the crew failed. While the implications towards Earth are not as dire, seeing that the crew of the Voyager all perished because of an idea brought on by one of the two survivors is a grim end to say the least. In the episode, Harry Kim devises a new form of slipstream drive that could allow Voyager to return home in hours. This mission requires him and Commander Chakotay to pilot a shuttle in front of the ship and direct them, and when the drive fails, the Voyager is sent crashing into a planet while the shuttle survives. This really sets up the only version of an ending to the Voyager's long journey home that is worse than the crew not making it there, which is that only 2 members of the crew do survive, and that they are partially responsible for the ship being destroyed. The timeline is saved in the end by some quick thinking by both characters, as well as a resurrected Doctor and a spare part from 7 of 9. The resolution also shaves 10 years worth of travel off the main timeline Voyager's trip to Earth at that point, and gives Harry a boost of confidence through a message from his other self. One of the darkest elements of the story is that we are shown both moments in time, as we see the broken survivors working towards an impossible solution, as well as a resilient and optimistic crew running fast towards a brick wall. The episode also forces now Captain LaForge, played by LeVar Burton, who directed the episode as well, to try and stop Harry Kim's objective by destroying him and Chakotay because of the Temporal Prime Directive, a Starfleet principle that we see will lead to all-out war. Speaking of said war, the Temporal Cold War had begun by the end of the 3rd season of Enterprise, and will be shown in detail in the 4th season episode Stormfront. As I mentioned earlier, the entire 3rd season of Enterprise led to the crew stopping the Xindi from destroying Earth, but upon the ship's return to the planet, they were greeted by no one. This is because a faction in the war led by an alien named Vosk had traveled back in time to Earth before the Second World War and provided the German army with technological advancements that allowed them to conquer the world. But Vosk had bigger plans than just taking over Earth, as he attempted to build a new time machine that would make his race the most powerful in the galaxy, but in the end they are stopped by the crew of the Enterprise with the help of Temporal Agent Daniels. While the audience does not see how the future would look if this occurred, outside of the absence of the Federation, we do see what New York would look like under German occupation, as by the time of the episode, the Second World War is still ongoing, but Germany is already taking control over parts of the United States. This is disturbing to say the least, especially if you consider the parallels with the future told in the episode City on the Edge of Forever, which, as I mentioned, also dealt with the United States losing the Second World War. Now, before you think this is some kind of meta joke, I'm not saying that Star Trek Discovery has created a dark timeline because of its content. I'm referencing the events that happened during the time jump that occurred between the 2nd and 3rd season of Discovery, where we learn by this time everything in the galaxy has gotten pretty messed up. This was due to an incident called the Burn, which made dilithium, the component that fuels warp drive, inert and caused any active warp field to explode. This destroyed thousands of ships and space stations, which led to millions of deaths across the galaxy, and also led to Starfleet being reduced to a whisper of its former self. This also made whatever dilithium had survived an extremely rare and valuable commodity, which led to massive corruption, slavery, and basically turned space into the American Old West. In the end, it was discovered that this was an unintentional ecological disaster that was tied to a young Kelpian who was stranded on a planet created from dilithium. After this finding, it appears that the Federation and the rest of the galaxy are on their way back from the brink, and this should be a good portion of what the series deals with going forward. Still, it was astonishing to see that after all the stories of hope that have been shown throughout Star Trek, that there would still lead to a future in which the galaxy is in a worse state than it was before the Federation was created. Well, that was my list of 10 of the darkest timelines in Star Trek history, but let me know in the comments if I missed any. Also, I do have a contest going through the month of June 2021, and I will pick a random commenter at the end of the month that is a subscriber and send them a brand new Blu-ray copy of the 1st season of Star Trek Lower Decks. So be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and let me know what you thought in order to be entered. Thank you very much for clicking on this video, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?